I would love to talk about how your respective rooms work, and I'd love to start with Fred, because your show is so unusual. Tell us a little bit about how Portlandia is put together.
Well, we're actually starting tomorrow, and usually Carrie and I get together, Carrie Brownstein and I get together for a couple days and just start throwing out some ideas. We just sit and then we only have a few other writers after that, Carrie Dornetto and then Jonathan Kreisel, the director. And we have kind of a traditional writer's room. We just kind of, we show up at like 10:30 or so. And we actually sit
early
in
risers.
Yeah, and we sit in a room till about 7 o'clock at night or so, and we just throw ideas at each other. And there's just a lot of like, I think that might work, that might be something, but no matter what, we just put a card up for it because we're like, well, you never know. So we do that, and then we spend about a month writing the show. And they're just in sketch form, and they're sort of, all the sketches are interchangeable throughout the season. So what you see at the end is mostly what the editors put together as, we have like wraparounds, like there'll be like a 3-part thing. And that's basically, some of them are barely ideas, some of them are more thought out.
Wow, so it's really a jigsaw puzzle almost.
It is, yeah. And then in a panic, right before we start shooting, about a few days before, we go, oh my God, we have to actually write these. So we start, and it is like a mad panic. We start pointing at cards and go, I'll do this one and I'll do this one. And that's the mad rush at the end of it.
Okay. Mindy, what was it like for you taking the reins of your own show this season?
Well, our room is very similar to the Office writers' room that Mike and Dan actually worked on with me. Yeah. And we have 10 writers in the show, and it's pretty much the traditional. I mean, I think it's pretty. I bet, does Parks do it the same way as The Office?
Don't address me directly.
And I just wanted to say, when you said you came in at 10:30, that at The Office, I would come in. We were supposed to start at 10, and if I came in a minute later, this person, Mike Schur, would be sitting there monitoring every minute that was late, and then you would like tell me, which I thought was peculiar.
Usually,
so that's one of the great jokes.
In my
I start
defense,
whenever I want. Yeah.
It wasn't 1 minute later.
He was like, why were you so obsessed? And then you would go tattle to Greg, I feel like.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's what happened. You would stroll in at like 11:30 and be like, I have to leave in 20 minutes because I have to get a manicure or something. And then I would be like, all right. And after 74 instances of that, I might have brought it up to our boss.
All this to say, we start at 10-ish. And no, but it's like we have 10 writers and writers in a writer's room, and right now we're 4 weeks in, and we're breaking all of the stories for this season. And we I don't know, we have the board up, and we do the cards for each act, A story, B story, and we pitch about like 3 to 4 episodes at a time to studio and then network. But it's pretty much like how we did it on The Office.
But you've actually been, I was just talking to someone who works on your show. You guys have actually already
you're talking to people on my new show.
I can address you or your employees.
Okay, yeah.
When I'm done, please direct your answers back to Cynthia.
All right.
You guys have already been writing for like a month though, right? Because you
Yes.
because you act on the show. That's interesting
Yes.
to me that like you guys have to get all your ideas out quickly because when you're shooting, you're on the set for like 60 hours a week.
We try to. It's a much more challenging thing when I'm on set. We have to wait till little pockets of time when we're like between takes or between scenes, and I run back and hear stories and
That
stuff.
sounds super hard to me. Is that hard to do? I don't know why I'm taking this over. You
Yes.
can get out of here. So
No, it's fun. It feels kind of glamorous. Because at The Office, I would stroll in, and it'd be like, well, what? Who cares? What's it like? But here, it's like, oh, no, it is nice. But it does become challenging. So it's this time of pre-production is big. But you kind of face that too, I'm sure. Like once you're in production, it's harder to get.
Yeah,
you in
but
the
we
room.
actually do have days on the set while we're trying to, because not sometimes, we always don't have endings.
Yes.
So we actually stand and stare at each other, and we look like we're thinking, but I don't think any of us are really thinking. We're like, yeah, I just got something, and that's it. So it is. That's what we're doing usually. Yeah.
Michael, tell us how.
Well,
the
first of
environment.
all, luckily my father drank, so I'm completely in denial that this family dynamic just happened. I'm the perfect person to be in this because I'm Teflon. I think they're just all happy. I mean, I think each writing room is different. For Two Broke Girls, I try to do, we get together, we start Monday, and we try to sort of dream up what could possibly happen. We sort of dream the season, and we come from the point of view of broke stories, girl stories, and then diner stories. And we all vomit all our stuff up. And this happened, and when I was broke, this happened, and this happened, and we sort of gradually get a very loose map, which we then, over 24 episodes, violate and change.
Dan, what was it like for you?
You blew it, man.
You thought I wasn't going to call on you, but what was it like for you guys? You guys juggled, of course, development, a very high-profile piece of development this year for Fox, while you were also doing Parks. What was it like for you this past year, juggling those two?
It was very tiring, but it was a challenge. It was in some ways we would find pockets of time to work on one or the other. We would often meet before the writers got in at around like 8:30 or 9, and we'd get breakfast, and we would sort of talk through our ideas. For first, we would often talk about Game of Thrones for quite some time. Then we would sort of pitch on ideas for the show, and then we would, for the new show for Brooklyn Nine-Nine on Fox.
Tuesdays this fall.
Tuesdays at 8:30, 7:30 Central. I'm assuming. And then we would also sort of talk about Parks, and it was kind of seamless. We would go back and forth a lot. And then the writers would come in around 9:30, and then we would all talk about Game of Thrones again until around 10:30. And then we would begin working on Parks, and sort of in the back of our heads, if something was percolating on the new show, we'd kind of pull each other aside feverishly into a closet or something and be like, oh, I have an idea for the new show. And sort
Always
of
in a closet. Why was it always in a closet?
it's so much more exciting.
Yeah, I guess so.
We
Sort of also had a template, by the way, because what we did was very similar to what Greg Daniels and I had done on The Office when he was approached about doing a new show, and he and I wrote Parks and Rec together, which was, there was an existing show that we were both working on, and then in little cracks in the schedule, and then over the off season, and then the beginning of season 5, I kind of shifted off and worked full-time on the pilot, and so we did that last year. Dan wrote like the 3rd episode of the season for Parks and Rec, and then after that didn't do any actual writing on Parks and Rec, was still breaking stories and running the room when I wasn't around and stuff, but we sort of like figured out ways to kind of lighten his load a little bit so that he could focus on the pilot. And then as soon as Parks and Rec wrapped, then we just went full on into the pilot writing and production and stuff. So it was, we managed to do it without having to like work a lot of weekends and stuff, which it looked like for a while we were gonna have to do. But
the nice thing is we were spending so much time on Parks that we couldn't sort of over-obsess about the new show, and that made the process a lot better. I mean, I think that the tendency is to sort of like go over every note and do things, really try to figure out how to address the note, and we didn't have that luxury. So to a certain extent, I think that time pressure, which happens as a season goes on with every show, where you're editing one episode and you're writing an episode and you're breaking an episode, you can't keep that critic hat on. You have to take it off and just put the writer hat on.
Do you literally have a writer hat?
We do. We have one. It's a 2-person hat that we wear simultaneously.
How much, you all talk about breaking stories, but do any of you actually write full episodes with your staff in the room, or is it a situation where you will assign out, parcel out
That's my
outline?
biggest nightmare, to hear this. Page 1, what do you got? That to me is torture. I would rather have everybody go off and write and actually have a shot at writing and having something underneath it that you're working towards, and then come back, and if it works, great, and if it doesn't, you build it together. But the idea of a blank page with TV monitors and 10 people around a room going in, on, in the, it's IE, IE, IE. I.e. I mean, to me, that is not writing as much as it is torture. And I really do like that you get to write. You know what I mean? You get to go away and build something that has hopefully a top and a middle and an underneath. Even in a very, very broad sitcom, there's something that you're working on rather than just completely line to line, for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I also think there's a law of diminishing returns in a writer's room where if more than about 6 people are working on the same thing at one time, someone is tuned out. So like there's 7 writers in a writer's room, focus on one task, one of them is like this on their phone. Just yeah, and so if we tried to group write like in the room at the same time, like half of the people would be useless, and it's way better. There have been only a couple times in 4 or 5 years now that we've had to sort of group write an episode, or we've chosen to group write an episode, but it's always that of like breaking it up into chunks, sending people away, and then getting together
It's
and
like a
reassembling.
late season thing that happens. It's always like right before the end, and then it's the worst. It's the worst too because the writer of the original script is also there, so it's like you're dealing with their egos, kind of like you're like, is that okay? Like, but it's definitely something that happens. Sometimes though, you have the most giddy nights
Yeah,
when you're
that's
like
true.
group writing something, and you
We
have,
did it
like,
once at
strange
the
tangents.
office, and there was a person who shall remain nameless whose name was on the script, and Greg Daniels got super giddy and giggly at like 11 in the morning about an extended run where Phyllis farted, and Michael
God.
kept talking about how she had farted, and it was like he just kept writing. We just kept pitching jokes about what Phyllis's gas might smell like to him and stuff. It was really disgusting, and this person called me on the way home in my car at like 12:30 in the morning, and I was like, the room's going crazy. It's like it's midnight, and we've been working hard. Like he was just letting off some steam. It'll never stay in the script, and then like a lot of it stayed in the script. But it was pretty. Do you remember that? It was pretty bad. It was like the longest fart joke
But those
in
group written
history.
episodes, I mean, isn't that the thing that always end up being sort of the best? Because you have all these weirdo little voices writing all these storylines. You put it together, and it's this very pleasing patchwork.
Yes, that's the
And-
reason you have our whole
and has all the
staff, because
special
everybody has
elements.
superpowers, and it's thrilling.
Yeah.
So you'll send them off, but then do drafts come back, and then they get kind of the group treatment?
Yeah, and then there's that hellish time when there's, the 16 scripts piled up, and everyone goes to their offices to read
What
it.
are you talking about?
I don't know what she's talking about. 16
You have-
scripts.
how many
have you been to
drafts-
the Smithsonian? I've never seen
No,
16
these-
scripts
No, the
piled
copies
up.
of it, and then everyone takes one and
She's
goes
just
off
in the
and
Writers
reads it.
Guild library, just pulling drafts of old shows off. I got 16 scripts.
But no, then everyone's reading it. There's like that day when everyone's reading the script.
Oh, you're saying 16
Copies.
copies of one
Yeah.
script. Oh, all right. Good God.
I thought you were a very well-organized
We
machine.
had 16 turned in at one
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
No.
You know
Are
that
you
terrible
crazy?
moment in July when you've written every episode and
You're just
everything's
hyper
perfect?
organized, and you're like, I guess
And
we
you're just
have
like,
a
what do
whole
I do
season
now?
written, right? I guess we should go on retreat.
Do I go see that Superman movie for the 4th time in the middle of the day on Tuesday? I was seriously very nervous that you really had somehow 16 scripts. And he was too, so don't look at me like that.
There's that,
Reading into everything that I did.
there's that moment in the writing room where you turn to the other people that are sort of in charge with you and you go, we have enough, right? We have enough. What do we have? 3? We have 3. That'll make it to Christmas, right? Right?
It is. It's like you have like $40 left, and you feel like, did I buy food and did I pay for gas? Like you can feel like you have a tiny cushion, and you feel like you're rich.
It's funny because when a script is great, there's no praise, really. Because I don't know if you guys have the same feeling about writing, but like praise seems empty, but criticism seems real. So if like when there's a really good script, you're like, okay, yeah, that's your job to turn in a good script. Great. Now let's just do our cursory pass and get it ready for the table read.
How's
There's no
morale
moment
on
of like,
your
hey,
staff?
everyone. And then a bad script, it's like so much more like there were good parts. Diplomacy, by the way, is something that when you're an angry member of a staff feeling righteous all the time, Greg would just let you do whatever you want. But then when you become the boss, you are like, oh, that trait when you're an underling makes you a tyrant as a boss. So you had to that was one thing is when work isn't what you want, it's sort of finding the good in it and doing all those things that you've read about in textbooks and things like that.
Fred, on your show, you have a lot of smaller pieces that add
Yes.
up to a whole. But how can you talk about the process of, you say at one point you realize you have to write them, but they are sort of
Yeah,
smaller
they're little
bits
segments.
of character.
But for every episode, we'll have like a theme, something that's so similar to the fart thing. if we have an idea, say for example, we had one that was Brunch Village, which we were talking about before. Thank you, Fred Armisen. What happens is in the room, the more that we can add to it, the more time all of a sudden we have more and more jokes for it, the more we realize, oh, this might be longer than just one sketch. So everything kind of starts as one piece, and then when it seems like there's a theme that we can make longer and longer, then that's when it becomes a 3-part one. So, and that just goes throughout the whole season. And then little by little, it just starts shaping itself. And then all throughout, even while we're shooting, it's still shaping itself. And we actually don't know very much until after it's edited. That's when the editors can kind of put together things that make sense. There are things that we thought were so brilliant that just end up being nothing, and then the opposite happens too. So you just never know until much, much later.
But in answer to your earlier question, the scripts come in, and then they do become kind of the communal property of the room, usually, is how it works on our show. And what we would do is we would sort of pitch jokes and alts, which stands for alternate versions, I guess. I don't know.
That's actually not what it is.
Oh, isn't it?
Nope.
What do you
There was
think?
a German writer, Altz,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and that was his practice. And he was at Paramount for many years, and they just...
So we would pitch alts. Yeah. And by tradition, the first alt is always in German, actually,
There you go. See?
which is difficult since nobody speaks German. But and then the script will balloon at that point up to sometimes 50 or 60 pages. No exaggeration. We'll just leave everything in, and then kind of come back and cull everything down, trim it until it gets to the 30 pages, 32 pages, and then that becomes the table draft. And there are several other rounds of it, but that's kind of the process. The table draft is called the Umlaut, after the Swedish writer. Jael Umlaut.
Do the alts, do the things that you trim out, do
Alt.
those make their way into subsequent episodes if they're...
Yeah, weirdly relevant story. I worked at the office. Greg Daniels came up with this term for a document called the candy bag. And the candy bag, the theory was little chunks of script that we liked but didn't make it in, or alts for different scenes. We would throw them in the candy bag, and then we would carry the candy bag around while we were shooting. And if something wasn't working, we'd go, let's look at the candy bag and whatever. So I finished working at season 1 of The Office, and I went to work for Michael at the show called The Comeback on HBO. And at The Comeback, hey, all right.
It took a minute. Because
Faster
there's no
next
front
time.
of the house.
So it was very interesting because those are the only 2 showrunners I'd ever worked for, and I marveled at times about the certain similarities between Greg Daniels and Michael Patrick King. And
Wait, are there any?
there are
Yeah,
actual, yes, there are
okay.
similarities. One difference is their
Fashion.
sexual preference is different, I would
Okay.
say. And so I was like, I said Michael Patrick King is kind of like the gay Greg Daniels. And I was thinking about that one day, and he was like, we were going through a script, and Michael said, we should have a document that's like for all the extra jokes and the alts and stuff that we don't need. And I was about to say, oh, we had that at the office. It was called the candy bag. And before I could, Michael said, well, call it the whipped cream file. And I was like, that's amazing. That's an amazing...
Up until, I don't remember that. I was just about to say there was nothing gayer I ever heard than candy bag. I completely forgot
But you found
that
it.
I had trumped
You found it.
candy bag with not only cream, but whipped.
Yeah.
And then, of course, tied it up in a clerical moment with file, which is just so me.
I remember, I'm not sure if it's accurate, but in my memory, there was a little flourish. There was a little like
That's
that.
not accurate.
That's what I remember.
That's as accurate as your
remember-
wizard hat. It doesn't happen. Only in your mind. Whipped cream file. Never. Like I'm Ed Wynn or somebody. Or Willy Wonka. Ooh, whipped cream file. Lunch. Jesus, Mike. Now you know I was on the show one season. Oh, no, it's because it was canceled. Speaking of writing rooms, if since you did mention The Comeback, one of the most accurate scenes about a writing room that I've ever participated in recreating is there's a scene in The Comeback where Valerie Cherish, who's this desperate actress, decides to go because she doesn't know any of the writers' names. She gets caught not knowing anyone's name, so she's going to visit the writing room at 3 o'clock in the morning and bring them brownies with the reality camera crew. And she walks up to the bungalow as they're doing what we called the cookie rape scene, where they're pretending to be her, and they're doing terrible things to her. And I was like, this is a documentary. This whole comeback is a documentary. And when Lisa Kudrow was in the room with us and we were talking about how the difference between writers and actors and how you feel about it, she just went white, that there would be an actual alternate reality. You have that experience, right? Being
How
both.
the tone of the writers' room versus
Yeah.
tone of act. Yeah, there's more an earnestness on set that I would say is not in the room. You can't be quite as earnest. You know, you can't. I don't know. I think that's the biggest difference, I would say.
There's also a thing though that like there has long been a weird divide between writers' rooms and between writers and actors. And I came from late night. Dan came from late night, and Greg Daniels came from late night, and there's no divide at like SNL or Conan. Like the writers and the performers, it's all one big swirl. You're trying to shoot live shows or 5 shows a week or whatever, and it's much more pleasant that way, that all the writers and actors are friends and stuff. And Greg sort of made that specifically an aspect of The Office, because Mindy and BJ and then Paul Lieberstein and a lot of the writers were performers. And then at The Comeback, it was the same thing. It was, you know, I remember meeting with Michael and him telling me about the show, and he said, you know, Lisa is going to be in the room every day. And I was like, yeah, sure she is. You know, it's grueling to be in a writer's room, and she had just come off like the most successful sitcom of all time, and it sounded crazy to me. And then she was in the room every day. She was just like you're talking about. She would shoot scenes and take a golf cart back and run in and pitch stuff, and was really like a part of the writing staff in an incredibly like significant way. And I believe that makes for good television. I think if there is no, you know, if there's the less amount of sort of creative divide there is between writers and actors, the better off the show is, because not just because writers snipe about actors and vice versa, that's always going to happen, but just because like there's more ideas floating around, and there's people who can like get excited about things at an early stage or can contribute meaningfully. Like I think there was a huge part of The Office. I think it was a huge part of The Comeback. It's a big part of Parks and Rec. I hope that it's a big part of the new show we're doing, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, this fall on Fox at 8:30. And it saddens me when I hear stories about shows where that divide exists, because that seems stinky to me.
It's terrible. I mean, that's the point of The Comeback, was that the writers hated the actors. I believe you have to be in love with the actors a little bit, especially with comedy, in order to get excited to give them a joke. I mean, it's very important who you hire as actors, and of course who you hire as writers, so that everybody sort of gets along.
Gotcha. Fred, your show does so much creative stuff with guest stars. Tell me about that process. Do you think of the character and then try to match it to the guest star, or vice versa?
It's kind of both. Like we'll have an idea for something, and then we just in our heads just think like, who would be really cool for this? And then sometimes we have a friend, for example, I don't know, Jack McBrayer, and we'll just think, well, he's available this week, so let's just try to think of something for him. So most of the people we've had on the show are just friends of ours, and that's kind of name dropping, I suppose. But I haven't said any names besides Jack McBrayer.
Jack McBrayer, you literally
I
just
just dropped a
McBrayer.
name. But that's pretty much what it is. I mean, it's just picture. We just think in our heads who would be. We had Roseanne Barr.
Again, name dropping.
I won't anymore. But Eddie Vedder was on, and he had that. And Chloe Sevigny. I can't stop. I really can't stop. Just, can you turn this off? But that's pretty much what it is. So it's different combinations of things happening. But it actually is mostly people's availability. That definitely, there are people who we've wanted on the show, and then they just didn't work out for scheduling reasons.
Gotcha. Is that kind of your guys' experience in terms of working in a guest star role? Is it character first and booking second, or?
The first season of the show, I think it was much more like, who do I already know? So because building chemistry with another actor, is, especially in a comedy, it's good if you already have a rapport. So with Seth, I just shot that movie with him, and Anders and especially and Bill and obviously the Office people. But sometimes the most successful things have just come from. For beginning of the season, I had this boyfriend named Josh, who was this actor Tommy Dewey, who was amazing, and he just auditioned for it. But we've worked backwards from actors, mostly because it's fun, And we've had this great trick where to get an actor to come to the show, we take someone who, I don't know, mostly plays like a weirdo. And we're like, what if they were like a palatable love interest? And we like sweep across them with like music, like we did for Bill Hader in the pilot. And then everyone's like, Bill Hader's hot. Like he's a dreamboat, I guess, And like we just had this fun thing of taking people that were like, I guess this person never gets to play this kind of role. And largely they're into it. So that's been one of the funnest part of the jobs.
We had a similar thing at Parks where in season 2, the network really wanted Leslie to have a new love interest. And they were pitching, like Channing Tatum and people they couldn't get, but like really just kind of good-looking dudes. And we created a character in the room, which was kind of a dumb cop who likes Leslie, but she's not sure he's smart enough for her.
But he was super handsome.
But
That
super
was the
handsome,
thing, like,
super
yeah.
handsome, not that bright, super handsome. And we went to Amy Poehler, Mike went to Amy Poehler and said, what do you think? And he sort of showed her the list, and she was like, get Louis C.K. And they're like, Mike was like, super handsome was, Louis C.K. is a fine-looking dude. I think he would acknowledge he is not Channing Tatum. And her point was he's super funny. He's a really funny guy, and you might as well get the funniest person you can get. And then he came on the show, we morphed the character a little bit. It was still not the brightest cop, and they had great chemistry. He was hilarious, and he was wonderful on the show. And it became what we call the polar doctrine of just getting the funniest person we can get, and then figuring out how to make the character work for that person.
Yeah, the polar doctrine has proved incredibly valuable. And that's why like Jenny Slate has been on the show in a recurring role, and Patton Oswalt and Fred and Will Forte, and it's literally for us is like, who are the funniest people we know and are they available? And then we sort of work backward from there.
Cool. Sounds like a pretty good doctrine. Michael, on this panel here, you're flying the flag for the multi-camera sitcom. You've worked in both. Can you talk about the differences,
I started
pros and cons?
I started in Murphy Brown, and that was my first experience with like a show that was already a success when I joined it, and so the audience was like, like it was like unbelievable. Everything worked. I joined them in season 5, so that was my first multi-camera experience. Then I went down a couple of roads, and I wanted to come back to it because I'd done what I considered little movies with Sex and the City, and then with the comeback, we tried to create this other thing that was a new form. And I thought, I want to see an audience again. I want to really feel that. And it's like the killer's coming from inside the house. The fact that I chose that for myself, to that demand of that audience. And what's great about it is you need a really sharp, joke-driven staff, because it's a machine that every time the actors stop talking, there's supposed to be a sound that comes out of the audience. And if it doesn't come out of them, then you have to put another joke in. So I like it because it's very exciting and vital, but it's also very, very demanding. Sometimes I feel like I'm in the basement of a big steamship just throwing jokes on a fire that just keeps burning up.
But it is fun. I mean, might sound stupid, but it's fundamentally a different writing process to write for multicam versus single cam?
I think so. I mean,
because of the joke demands?
Because of the joke demands. In this particular version of what we're doing, it's very old-fashioned in its but with a contemporary edge. So there's a machine there that they say things. There's an expectation of when they open their mouth that something funny or shocking is going to come out of them. So you lose a little bit of the layered, nuanced stuff that I did in other shows, but you gain this very lean writing. I mean, all of these shows are incredibly lean. I mean, when we're trying to, they're 21 minutes now, and we're still trying to have beginning, middle, and ends, and move people and do romance, and still in 21 minutes, it's very lean storytelling. Yeah. So I like the practice of that again. I feel like that was fun to invest in.
I was just going to say there are also some storytelling differences. I mean, you can't jump from one scene to another to tell a story, so it's more like a little play.
Play.
In terms of breaking a story, you have to figure out how to move it along in terms of entrances and exits in a room as opposed.
And it has a big, each scene you start it up and then you end it. And when you're writing the other shows, you just drop the penny where you want it to be. You come right at that moment. We have to get there. And it's fun, but it's muscular.